Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us today. Cybersecurity is an area in which your department has very considerable responsibilities, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that there is any effort required by Congress to address our cybersecurity gaps at this point?
As you know, we've had a variety of conversations about reorganizing the NPPD where cyber is. First is starting with the name. It really is important.
I mean something a little more significant than changing the name.
Yeah, but I just want to, if I could pause on that really.
Is there anything else you think we should be doing other than changing names and bureaucratic structures?
It's not bureaucratic structure, sir. Nobody knows what they do. Do you know what NPPD is? Nobody does. That's the point. So we need to make it clear that cybersecurity is within the Department of Homeland Security. The name change is important so that our stakeholders know that.
So let's
so what else?
What we need to do is important. Is there anything else important?
Yes, sir. What we need to do is we need to look at additional ways that we can share information, that we can use information that we gain from our intel community.
And Congress should be allowing that?
Congress should allow that in appropriate circumstances, yes, sir.
What do you specifically request of Congress? I'm trying to figure out what the legislative agenda of your department is in Congress with respect to cyber. Is there a specific proposal that you have in writing any place that we could see, that we could consider with respect to having hearings and trying to augment whatever authorities you need?
Sure. We have multiple technical assistance that we've provided to a variety of bills, but we're happy to sit down with you and walk through.
But is there an actual proposal? Technical assistance is something that departments do in response to legislative proposals from Congress to try to amend legislation that we've proposed to make it work effectively in your system. It's not, I don't think, in my view, properly characterized as a proposal by the executive branch. I'm trying to find out what the executive branch is proposing to us.
We do not have a separate proposal, no, sir.
Okay. I would actually urge that you consider it. I think there's bipartisan interest. I think cyber is a real issue, and I think the silence from the administration with respect to legislative recommendations is deafening right now. You also participate in the so-called NIST framework for protecting critical infrastructure, correct?
Yes.
What is your view of the adequacy of the security for our electric grid that is presently provided by the NIST framework?
So the NIST framework, as you know, in conjunction with a variety of protocols and guidance provided by the Department of Energy, encourages those owners and operators of electric utilities to take a variety of measures.
And we need to continue guaranteeing an American that their electric service is secure from cyber attack. How confidently can you assert to us that the NIST framework does that job?
The NIST framework is voluntary.
In other words?
In other words, we need to continue to do more. We need to update it, and we need to keep up with the threat. The threats continue to evolve.
And what would make it more than voluntary? What would make it mandatory? What are you looking for to go beyond voluntary on security in the electric grid from cyber attack?
It needs to be updated.
Okay. And does it need to be updated with help from Congress, or is it something that you're going to do to update it on your own?
I believe it's something NIST is doing under its own authority and direction from Congress to do, but the Department of Homeland Security is a strong partner with them, along with industry. So we will continue to provide them a guidance and support.
I'll make it a question for the record, but I'd love to know what exact guidance the Department of Homeland Security has given NIST with respect to these updates that you recognize are required, and if there is any legislative effort that you think is required to support or to supplement the NIST framework, I would like to have that.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
make that a question for the record also, if I may. I don't think it's an unfair question, do you?
I do not.
Okay.
Cybersecurity is a huge and emerging issue. DHS continues to expand under the authorities that we have, working both with international partners as well as industry. And yes, sir, I think it is worth further discussing.
Good. Election interference. Does the Department of Homeland Security have a role in election interference?
We are looking at the cybersecurity of election systems upon request of states, as you know. So we have 11 states right now where we are conducting risk and vulnerability assessments at their request, and we have prepared for any other requests from the 50 states, and we'll ensure that it occurs upon request before the next election cycle.
Was there Russian election interference in the 2016 elections? And can we anticipate further Russian and foreign election interference in the 2018 elections?
I believe that Russia in general will continue to try to test our systems, and where they can extract information and perhaps disrupt, they will.
So yes and yes?
Yes, there was interference. To my knowledge, no votes were changed.
And in 2018, do you expect them to come at it again?
In 2018, I think we can expect a variety of actors to test our systems. Yes, sir.
And what steps do you recommend or are you taking to protect the 2018 elections from that continued interference?
So the first is the risk and vulnerability assessments that we're offering. We're working within our National Infrastructure Protection Plan framework to provide guidance to help states and localities.
That was the guidance to the 21 states that there's actually been technical hacking of their election machinery?
That wasn't guidance, that was a notification. So the guidance that I'm talking about is looking at the full system, if you will, of the election cycle. So going all the way back to supply chain concerns through to the dissemination of votes upon capture.
The reports that have looked at this from places like the Atlantic Council and the CSIS have all reported that the avenues of Russian election interference are not limited to specific cyber intrusions. They also involve propagandizing, the propagation of fake news, the creation of phony people who are actually bots to drive information, efforts to manipulate American companies like Facebook and Google and so forth. Are you interested in those means of interference as well, or are you limited in your effort to the specific cyber intrusion and the potential for actually changing a vote between the machine where it's cast and the register where it's tallied?
We are working on our core mission, which, as you know, is cybersecurity. But yes, we're working with other interagency partners on the broader issue of Russian propaganda, as you called it, but Russian insertion of.
You have a better name for it?
Nope, that's what it is.
Okay. Do you have any legislative proposals related to election interference and that would help us protect our 2018 elections from continued interference?
I do not believe that, at least from a DHS perspective at this time, that we need any additional authority in that area, but we'll be sure to follow up with you.
Okay. So you're comfortable that you can protect America from having Russians or other foreign actors interfere in all of the ways that I mentioned from our 2018 elections?
No, sir, that's not what I said.
Well, then why would you not need additional either resources or authorities in order to address the problem if you can't do it with what you have now?
Because, as you know, DHS does not play that role. That is a state and local role to ensure the integrity of their election systems. We are providing support and guidance and will continue to do so.
Okay, so you are testifying that the United States Department of Homeland Security has no role in protecting the country from...
Sir, that's not what I said. I said we're providing guidance and support.
Role.
We're providing risk and vulnerability assessments upon request, but it is the role and responsibility of a state to ensure its election process.
So I guess what I'm trying to get a clear response of what your interest and concerns are in this area, but it sounds to me as if what you have told us is that you see the federal role in protecting American elections as subordinate to the role of the states, and the role of your department is only to provide guidance and whatever other support you are offering to
guidance,
states.
Guidance, support, information sharing, vulnerability, and risk assessments. Yes, sir.
And does that include all the other areas of Russian election interference that I addressed beyond just the pure cyber intrusion into the state-run election systems?
We are working with our federal interagency departments to try to address the broader conversation, just as we are with terrorist use of the
internet. Okay, so there is a federal role in that, that you're engaged in with the federal interagency process, not
discussions,
just with the states,
yes, sir.
Correct? And out of that, have there been any legislative recommendations whatsoever from any department to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge on the propaganda, no.
Thank you very much.
Senator Klobuchar.
I think I may be the last questioner that you will see. So I hope that as you go back and reflect on today's hearing, that a few things stick out. I think Senator Graham's conversation with you, I hope that you take that very much to heart. I think its formulation of the need for there to be a phase one and then a phase two, and that if either side wants everything in phase two pushed forward to phase one, we'll crash right at the very beginning. We won't be able to move forward. Phase one, I think, is a very constructive idea, and I thought that after the first meeting with the President, we were very close to the outline of a phase one resolution. I think also the notion that's been discussed here of wall systems is a very good idea, because I think there's a difference between being in support of border security and being in pursuit of massive, unnecessary, overly expensive, and unwanted public works spending programs, just walls for the sake of walls, particularly where they will do damage to local communities, local farmers, local access to the river, and so forth. I think the more we kind of calm down and think this thing through, the more you'll find that there is, in fact, support for considerable, reasonable increases to border security. And I hope that's the key message you take away. I would like to change the topic in my last minutes to fentanyl. Fentanyl is killing Americans at a phenomenal, appalling rate. Fentanyl is a compound created chemically that behaves in the mind, in the brain, as if it were heroin, but it can be dialed up to far more lethal concentrations. And the result is that very often an addict who is accustomed to heroin gets suddenly into fentanyl and they die. Rhode Island has a small town called Burrillville. It's got just a couple of thousand people. It's got, I think, only 2 funeral parlors. There may be 25, 30 people in the entire police department. So in one 3-month period, the beginning of the year, a couple of years back, when I was working on the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act with Senator Portman, they had 6 fatalities in that little community. That is a little bit like beating on a bruise, you know? People get hurt by the first fatality, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth, and people know each other, and it's back to the same funeral homes, and the police are starting to get very agonized at what they have to see and how hard it is for them to respond and that they can't deal with it. And the lethal aspects of fentanyl, I think, are felt all across the country in all of our states. My understanding is that a very good deal of it is coming from China, that it is so potent that it can be dialed down to fairly small packages and still shipped. And I would like to urge that you make it a really important border security priority, as important as walls and fences, to try to figure out how our shipping services and our postal service, through which customs-controlled materials come from overseas, can find the damn fentanyl before it gets into our children and kills them.
You have my commitment, sir. Earlier, we talked about the STOP Act. We talked about the Interdict Act, but we need to do more, and I couldn't agree more.
I think the topics that I've mentioned in my previous questioning, election interference and cybersecurity, are ones where I think there's very considerable partisan eagerness to protect our country on both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats alike feel very strongly about that. Fentanyl is exactly the same way.
I agree.
There is a bipartisan door that is open to you on all 3 of these issues. So I urge you, come knocking.
I look forward to it, sir.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you for bringing all 3
I'm a little
up.
frustrated that there seems to be no proactive legislative effort coming from any part of the administration on cyber, coming from any part of the administration on election interference, and very little coming on fentanyl. And I think these are opportunities that you are missing to accomplish important things in a bipartisan way that will save American lives.
We will be by to talk about it.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Flake.